Welcome to A Little TLC, the podcast where we embark on an enlightening journey through the ever-evolving world of education. I'm your host, Heather Volchko, and I'm on a mission to empower educators and change makers to skillfully navigate the intricacies of serving our most exceptional students. Every month, we'll be exploring a unique and timely theme in a mini-series format, whether we're digging into inclusive teaching practices, addressing student mental health challenges, or exploring the intricate connection between our personal and professional lives. Each month offers an in-depth exploration of weekly topics that truly matter. I hope you're ready to be both challenged and inspired because this is A Little TLC. All right, so last week we were talking more about those leadership dynamics, kind of those like, what's our kind of inclination? How do we go with these things? Kind of how do we show up in these roles? This week we're shifting it to be more practical, more tangible. Like, what can I actually do with my team that can actually result in these things that we've been talking about all month? So I'm just going to jump right in here with you this week and say, okay, when we're talking team building and leadership strategies, why do we do those things? What is it that we're actually trying to get out of it? We'll get into the tangible strategies, but like, why do we actually care to cultivate that, build that, do that with our team?
I mean, ultimately, because what that's what determines if we actually accomplish what we're set out to accomplish,
Mm.
right? Like, and, as a leader, we got to always remember what the role is. The role is to hit whatever the target is, right? And to do it with a team that feels a part of it, that wants to move forward, and like, you know, and it's such a big creed that I always try to remember is that as a leader, you're still just a part of the team, right?
Yeah.
There is no hierarchy. Like, I'm not better than, you're not more than, you're not more valuable than, right? It's just, you just have a different jersey number.
Mm.
So like, all this stuff is so important because I mean, even reflecting on early phases of my career, right? Where leaders start at the bottom of the totem pole themselves, right? And you know what that feels like to be in a team where your voice doesn't feel like it matters, or you don't feel like you belong, or it doesn't feel like
Mhm.
you're valued. And then how that shuts down your own, perspectives and ways that
Right.
you contribute. So for me, as I've moved into leadership spaces, I've never forgotten where I began. And I think that's one of the most important pieces is that, you were once the new intern. You were once the new hire. You were once that person who is trying to get their sea legs and their bearings of how do I operate here and how do things move. So if my role now as the leader is we need to accomplish some big picture, and I stay grounded with I always know what it feels like to be the new person on the team, then now I'm way more cognizant to what's the environment that I'm building for success. Do I actually have a space that's conducive for people's growth? So it's the ultimate, you know, pillar of really building a cohesive team is, as the leader, do I actually care?
Mhm.
Right? Like, and that's been the biggest thing for me. Like, even looking through some of my companies that I've run, I can think back to early phases in my second business where we were starting to really start doing more events in the community, taking up more space, teaching classes, all kind of stuff. And for the first 2 years, whenever I would teach a class, I would have to bring in an outside consultant. I'd have to bring in some other source to help me do that. But as I started over the next 2 years, pouring into my staff, pouring into my team, really educating them, helping grow their competency, helping them become solution oriented, grow their maturity and their approach to things. Well, now that shifted the entire approach of how I had to do business because now I didn't necessarily need those outside consultants.
Mhm.
Now I had built a team that was competent, right?
Yes.
Which shifted the entire culture, right? Because on the front end, when your team feels like, oh, you're not trusted, and therefore I need to bring in an outside source, that
Mhm.
also changes how they show up. Right now, they feel a little bit less empowered. They're just going to check the box. They're just going to do the bare minimum to get through the day.
Yeah.
But when they become the focal point, and you're the people that I'm leaning on, and together we're going to accomplish this big mission. Well, now that changes. Well, now I'm a part of it. Now I have buy-in. Now I
Mhm.
have stake in the game. Now I want to engage at a higher level. Now I have new questions. So my role as a leader, right, is one, I had to slow down to speed up. So I had to stop rushing my people to be a version of me because they're not,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm me because I've done all this work for all these years and learned all these skill sets. But now the role is not to identify a copy, is to help train someone else and give them what I know. So
Yes.
slowing down to speed up on the front end of not having this super high bar expectation that someone's going to be perfect, but understanding, hey, there's a new person. And it took me time to learn all this, right? So if I wanted that same grace for myself, I should be giving that same grace to others, right? And giving them that time on the front end to really help. So what that shifted in the culture of my business as we kind of fast forwarded 2 years is now we did a lot more internal work, right?
Hmm.
And instead of bringing in that outside person, I could leverage this person over here. And now, instead of me being an integral part of it, I can pull 2, 3 people from the team and let them go run that project,
Yes.
right? And then, hey, just let me know how it goes or where I can help, right?
Hmm.
And now they feel like they have ownership, and it changes everything. But I think going back to some of the core fundamentals of things we've talked about before is that environment conducive for growth, right? Well, what's the foundation of that? What's the fertilizer for that environment? Psychological safety, right? Where
Hmm.
people aren't scared to fail, where they're not scared to ask a question, where they're not scared to mess up, right? And one big project that a lot of people might have heard of, if you haven't, it's a valuable one, is Google's Project Aristotle, right? Where
Mm.
they studied all high performing teams. And
Yep.
the biggest thing they found, I mean, it's based on Aristotle's quote, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But
Hmm.
like what they found is, having that psychological safety built in is what builds the highest performing teams. Well, I had coffee this morning with a friend. We sat at the park and we just kind of talked about business and leadership and all that. Um, and as we're sitting there, he asked about diversity and inclusion work. And he said, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's real. And I said, that's not a choice that you can make. I was like, it's not optional. It's not an opinion based thing. I was like, I have 5 fingers and they're all different, right? I have diverse fingers, right? Like I didn't choose to all have like a handful of thumbs. But the biggest thing that people need to overcome when it comes to looking at diversity and inclusion work is how they gauge its success. I was like, the issue that I see in a lot of corporations, organizations, school systems, all that is that they think it's a checkbox.
Yep.
They think it's just a thing that I can say, oh, we grew by this amount of revenue. So therefore, then that's not how it works. It's
Yep.
it's in the conversation. It's slowing down with somebody. It's knowing about their family. It's knowing what's going into their decision making process. And it's being able to hold space for them so that they can perform at their best, which may not be on Monday. It may be on Wednesday. Maybe Tuesday, they need a little bit of time to figure out some stuff with the kids, right? And as a leader, if I can slow down to have that convo on Monday, to give
Hmm.
them space on Tuesday, when they show up Wednesday, they're super appreciative. They're grateful for the environment that they're a part of. They're glad they have a leader who can see them and, respect them for who they are as a person. And they show up Wednesday way more excited to get to work. So it's not the metric, it's the slowing down, the taking time, and really building in that psychological safety aspect as the fertilizer for the environment, where someone can say, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm having a little bit of a hard time here. I could use some help. Or I just need a day. Whatever that whatever the thing is a person needs, because when you start implementing these slow down practices, listening practices, asking one more question practices, and I think we talked about that in a previous episode too, of
Hmm.
just those 2 little phrases of say more and what makes you say that,
Yep.
right? Those little things, if I can just do that as a leader with my team, people show up way differently.
Yeah, but I think what you're talking about is like, how do you create that space so that people can show up? Like more than just, clock in, clock out, do the time
Yeah.
kind of a thing that I can actually show up and I can be, well, I think there's a lot of different disagreements around like, are we ever fully present? That whole thing, right? But when I know that I have space to take care of other things, that means that I also have space to take care of these things. And if I know that in my team, however, if it's a work team or a social team, like whatever group of people that I know that I have those different spaces and those different times allotted for, accounted for, and kind of honored and respected by those different people groups, well, then I can show up more freely, even if I'm not fully present. I can be more free to show up more holistically in this space in this way. But that I think does come from I have that uh openness or like it's okay that's more than just words. It's not just like, oh, this is a psychologically safe workplace. Like, well, you don't get to declare that. It needs to actually be that.
You asked, we answered, and the virtual door is now open. Heather, Manny, and Candace address the questions you submitted and provide valuable insights, tips, and strategies. This is your event. Your thoughts drive our conversation. Be that fly on the wall and immerse yourself in the camaraderie and knowledge exchange that happens inside our consultancy. But remember, this is an exclusive event for all of our district partners and network supporters. Supporting members of the TLC Network gain access to a virtual community where you can discuss and share insights with fellow supporters anytime. We even host a mini professional learning community about our latest episode every Monday. Prepare for an exclusive behind-the-scenes experience as we invite you to eavesdrop on this month's dynamic conversation. See you on the inside.
And so when we're showing up in those spaces, I'm thinking of like one of the research projects that I got to, it just sort of happened, was there was a team that was really struggling, a lot of internal dissension, a lot of hierarchical challenges where kind of the titles carried more weight than maybe the productivity or even the skills that the team had to kind of play with. And one of the metrics that we used was just productivity, right? Like your team is stuck. Like it's not actually coming to the result that you want them to come to. So can we try some of these goofy, silly team building things? Can we break down some of these barriers? Can we get rid of some of this hierarchical issue and see, right? Hypothesis, it's a guess, and see if your team can actually increase its productivity. Can you get back in the groove of actually getting what you're here to do done? And it was like, this is dumb, this is goofy, like whatever, like very dismissive, but they were also completely at a roadblock and they hadn't
Yep.
found any other avenues. So they were like, I mean, if you want to, okay, whatever. And it actually worked. And people had space to kind of share things in ways that were less scary than like going to the boss and airing grievances. Instead, it just came up in activity. And like completely irrelevant to the actual work that they're doing, but just to kind of break down some of those social barriers and to allow people to bump shoulders with each other in a way that didn't have that hierarchy associated with it. And now all of a sudden, people were just people and they
Yeah.
could just be themselves. And then when they walked back into the work, now all of a sudden they had these other versions of each other that were also present at the same time. And the collaboration, the communication was smoother. They were
Mm,
more able to actually hash stuff out and like come up with like come into that problem and walk through toward some semblance of any solutions as opposed to then just, well, that's a problem.
yeah.
Right. And then that was where their team was stuck. Now they were able to iterate, they were able to collaborate, they were able to like challenge each other's thinking and not have any of this fear kind of associated with it, or at least not as much as what there had been before. Enough had been kind of broken down that they could start trying to kind of move again. But those are the things, right, where like it's just the work needs to get done. Whatever that
Yeah.
work is, it just needs to get done. And then we come in with these words like psychological safety and like all this stuff, like the stuff that seems so ambiguous, but you can actually quantify some of these outcomes in a way that, is meaningful to people who care about metrics, even if maybe those interventions, in my
Yeah.
words, right? Like the interventions may seem a little, I don't know, out of left field or not, connected, right? People are like, oh, we need to look at team management. We need to look at conflict resolution. We need to look at team building. Like, what? But to see how some of those things are actually connected, right? It's just attempt the
Yeah.
intervention and collect the data and did the data shift, right? Like that's really what it comes down to. But
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't feel as directly, connected or interconnected as what it, most of us may assume from the beginning.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think you described it so perfectly of just remembering the humanity of us.
Yeah.
Like remembering we're people. And that's the thing that we forget when we come into the office or we come to in some professional setting and you're there under the guise of whatever you're there for, right? I'm this behavioral technician or I'm this project analyst or I'm this
Yep.
whatever the title is. And in your own mental model, you have a picture of what that's supposed to be.
Mhm.
And you step into the room in that picture, not in your truth. And I
Mm.
think the value of these team building and like more explorative exercises is it reminds us of who we are. That yes, you may be a supervisor, right? But also you're a mom who has a child with disabilities, a parent who's blind who just moved in with you, you're pregnant with your second child, and you just got a promotion at your work, right? And you're dealing with all these competing things inside of your scenario that if I just see you as the person on the other side of this Outlook email, your challenge can feel like an attack.
Yes.
Or you're not responding to my email can feel like laziness or procrastination. But
Hmm.
when I know who you are, I'm like, she's probably just had like some stuff going on. Like, I'll just ping her tomorrow. Right.
Yep.
And it changes the way that we approach each other, the way that we work with each other. And we have so much more grace and understanding because now I want to help you. Now,
Yeah.
when you can't get back to me with that email by a certain time, you know what? I understand that you have life stuff going on. Let me fill the gap for you. Let
Yes.
me help the team support. Like, let me show up because we know each other. We have buy-in with each other's lives, right? I want you to now be successful. You're not just another person who's at this company, right? I want you
What
to win, family. Go ahead.
what you're talking about is contextual behavior analysis.
Yeah.
So like you are making assumptions on someone else's kind of motive, or we would call it like that function of behavior. Why is what I'm seeing happening? But you are weighing so much of that analysis on the context, right? And if you don't know the context, you cannot consider that in part of your analysis. And that's something that I do a ton, not just with students, right? But with staff too, exactly the way you're talking about it, right? Like I'll get pulled into a conversation and some staff has a certain perspective around another staff. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, take it in, right? Like all the stories, all the information. But then I'm also seeking additional information that I wasn't provided from the get-go. A lot of times it's just information that people don't know or they don't
Yeah.
have about each other. And that could be anything from the staff to the community to the kid to the family to like all the different angles. It's just, I don't know, I ask a ton of questions, right? Not to just be annoying, but truly to try to open up any bit of context that could then make the situation make more sense. And I think within a team, as much as I personally tend to really hate a lot of these team building exercises, like that's the purpose of it, right? It opens up context in a way that it doesn't necessarily just naturally happen in the context of a work situation or work dynamics. What you're talking about is truly like that contextual behavior analysis. You're looking at the behavior, you're trying to understand why or what that choice is communicating, and you're only able to do that with the information that you have at hand.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to where this combo began of my role as a leader is I have to care about the people.
Yes.
Right? Like I cannot have an effective team if I just see them as people in numbers. Right? I
Mhm.
have to see them as humans with families. And like when I do, then now I understand that asking these other questions matter. That learning about the context matters. Right? And for me, it always goes back to that same self-reflection of I remember being the newest person and so many things that impacted my work performance that no one ever asked about.
Mhm.
They never asked about what was going on at home
Yeah.
or how my family was doing or what I thought about certain things. They never asked about it. They just said, "Hey, that guy, he's not really performing that well."
Mhm.
And it wasn't because I didn't want to, I just didn't know how. And I needed a space where someone could just guide me, right? Have a little support. So all the way back to where we began is like as a leader looking at a team, I have to know very clearly that when I focus on the person, that moves the bottom line.
Mhm.
And therefore, my shift and focus needs to be the person, right? Which, and there's so many things that we can do to really help move the needle forward there. One of which is a mentorship program, right? That's something that I
Yep.
implement in every organization I'm a part of, is there needs to be a mentoring aspect in some way. However, not an assigned mentor.
Thank you.
Somebody wants to be a mentor
Mhm.
because then that defeats the whole purpose, right? Like I've been in those scenarios where like, yeah, I had a mentor assigned to me, never talked to the person. They sent me one email about this 6 months ago, and that was it. And it's like, well, that they should have never been your mentor, right?
Yeah.
Like so. Creating spaces where you can actually get that reflective exercise, you can get that feedback loop. Also, one other thing: rotating leadership assignments, right?
Mhm.
Give like we talked about with my business team of, hey, I'm going to now delegate this event to you three. And now you go run it. Because now when I allow other people to step up and have ownership, not only does it increase their buy-in on a personal level, but it also widens their perspective of leadership. And it helps them to understand why people lead in different ways. And they start learning leadership dynamics themselves. And now they have even more grace for me because they're like, oh, I didn't realize you were doing all this. Oh, now I get why you asked that question. Right. But like creating those opportunities where people can step up and start moving something themselves, right. And rotating that to create that not only psychological safety, but, this isn't necessarily a business term, but grace, right? Like understanding for each other, right? And all this, right? Because this whole conversation is culture. Whole conversation is culture, and culture is people, right? And it, I don't want to get redundant with always taking it back to people, but that is the whole topic is people, right? And just the perspective of them, the value of them, how we see them, how do we empower them, how do we give them spaces to grow, where people aren't scared to fail, but they're passionate about pursuing their purpose.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to let us land right there this week because next week we're wrapping up the whole month and we're talking about sustainability. And truly everything that you've been talking around this week, although we've been focused on, how are we actually integrating that teaming and actually working with the people that are in front of us? How can we set them up for success? That's more than just a drop in the bucket. It's more than just a one-time event or kind of that checklist type of thing. It becomes just business as usual. And that's that sustainability piece, which is exactly where you're headed. So I think I'm going to pause this right here and we'll pick it up next week. Hey, before you jump back into your busy life, we want to invite you to head over to thresholdlearning.org, your one-stop destination for all things TLC. Here you'll find our blog with this episode's show notes, our ever-expanding bookshelf of resources, and anything else we've talked about. Trust us, there's a ton of benefits waiting for you to explore. Just head over to thresholdlearning.org, click on network, and we'll see you on the inside. Sharing the podcast with your colleagues is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at Threshold Learning TLC on Facebook and Instagram. A personal recommendation is by far the best way to share the podcast. Let them know they can listen on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else they catch their podcasts. Just be sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite platform. You can email us at info@thresholdlearning.org. We always enjoy connecting with fellow educators and champions for educational justice. You can find everything you're looking for at thresholdlearning.org. See you there.